The sound of perfectly manicured fingernails tapping against Italian leather was the only warning I had before Brittany's voice cut through the humid Florida evening air like a razor blade through silk. Well. If it isn't Madison, still driving that pathetic little Honda around town like she's some kind of martyr. I stood frozen in the parking lot of Apalachicola Elementary, my keys halfway to the door of my 2015 Honda Civic, as my ex-husband's new wife delivered her latest verbal assault with the precision of a surgeon and the compassion of a shark. The other parents filing into the school for the annual spring recital pretended not to notice, but I could feel their sideways glances like pinpricks against my skin. What Brittany didn't know, what none of them knew, was that parked 3 blocks away, gleaming under the streetlights of Commerce Street, sat a metallic blue Lamborghini Huracan worth more than most people's houses. And tonight, she was about to find out exactly how wrong she'd been about everything. My name is Madison Claire Sutton, and 3 years ago, I thought my life was ending. The divorce from Robert James Whitfield III, Bobby to his friends, though he'd always insisted I call him Robert in public, had been the kind of spectacle that small towns like Apalachicola, Florida, thrive on. Bobby was a third-generation lawyer whose family had been practicing law in Franklin County since before the Civil War. The Whitfield name was on buildings, scholarship funds, and the donor wall at the local hospital. When he left me for his 26-year-old paralegal, Brittany Nicole Prescott, the gossip mill ran for months. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Bobby's legal team, led by his own father Robert Jr., portrayed me as a gold-digging housewife who'd contributed nothing to our 8-year marriage except producing our daughter, Savannah Rose, now 10 years old. They claimed I'd been living off Bobby's success while playing with crafts in my spare time. The settlement was modest, enough to rent a small apartment on Avenue E and maintain my reliable but unremarkable Honda Civic. What they didn't know was that during those 8 years of marriage, while Bobby was building his reputation as Apalachicola's most eligible bachelor attorney, I had been quietly constructing something far more valuable than a legal practice dependent on family connections and small-town politics. The seeds of my empire had been planted during the lonely evenings when Bobby claimed to be working late at the firm. While Savannah played in her room and I waited for a husband who was actually in hotel rooms with his paralegal, I began crafting jewelry. It started as therapy, a way to keep my hands busy and my mind from wandering to the expensive perfume I'd started smelling on Bobby's shirts, or the way he'd suddenly become protective of his phone. My first sale was to Janet Morrison, who ran the gift shop on Market Street. She'd admired a pair of earrings I'd worn to the annual Oyster Festival and asked if I could make something similar for her daughter's graduation. That single $20 sale led to another, then another. Within 6 months, I had a small but steady stream of customers throughout the Panhandle. I registered the business under my maiden name, Madison Sutton, as Coastal Treasures Design Studio. The paperwork was filed in Tallahassee, far from the prying eyes of Franklin County's legal community. When Bobby occasionally asked about my little hobby, I'd mention making a few extra dollars here and there. Technically true, if you only counted the slow months. The divorce was finalized on a sweltering July afternoon in 2021. Bobby and Brittany were married exactly 6 months later in a ceremony that cost more than most people's annual salary. The wedding was held at the Whitfield family estate on the river, with guests flown in from across the southeast. Savannah was their flower girl, a detail that still stung 3 years later. After the divorce, I threw myself into building Coastal Treasures. The small apartment on Avenue E became my headquarters, with Savannah doing homework at the kitchen table while I worked on designs, managed online orders, and handled customer service calls. The business grew slowly but steadily, fueled by word-of-mouth recommendations and a growing social media presence. Bobby's new life with Brittany was the opposite of subtle. They bought a sprawling house on the historic district, complete with a 3-car garage that housed his BMW, her Mercedes, and a boat that cost more than my annual income. Brittany had quit her job at the law firm after the wedding, dedicating herself to what she called supporting Robert's career and elevating their social position. In practice, this meant hosting elaborate dinner parties, joining every charitable board in town, and making sure everyone knew about their expensive vacations and designer purchases. Savannah would return from weekends at their house with stories that alternated between fascinating and heartbreaking. The new house had a pool and a game room, but also rules about not touching certain furniture and keeping quiet when Daddy was working. Brittany had redecorated Savannah's room in shades of pink that my daughter diplomatically described as very bright, and there were strict schedules for meals and activities. The subtle digs about my circumstances came through Savannah's innocent observations. Brittany had apparently commented on how sad it was that I still drove such an old car, how unfortunate it was that I couldn't afford to send Savannah to private school like the other attorneys' children, and how difficult it must be for me to get by on such a limited income. I absorbed these comments with gritted teeth and forced smiles, using them as fuel for the long nights spent growing my business. By the second year after the divorce, Coastal Treasures had expanded beyond individual sales to supplying boutiques throughout the Gulf Coast. I developed a signature style that combined traditional Southern elegance with coastal themes, pearl and shell combinations, sea glass accents, and designs inspired by the barrier islands that dotted our coastline. The breakthrough came when Atlanta's socialite Caroline Ashworth wore one of my necklaces to a charity gala that was featured in Southern Living magazine. The piece was photographed, and within days, my website crashed from the volume of orders. I hired my first full-time employee, then a second, then moved operations to a small warehouse space on the outskirts of town. Bobby and Brittany remained oblivious to my success. In their minds, I was still the struggling single mother barely making ends meet in my modest apartment. This perception was reinforced by my decision to maintain the same lifestyle. I kept the Honda, stayed in the same apartment, and continued shopping at the same grocery stores I'd always frequented. The only changes were invisible: the growing bank account, the expanding business, and the increasing interest from major retailers. The transformation accelerated during the third year. Coastal Treasures caught the attention of a major department store chain looking to expand their artisan jewelry selection. The contract was worth more than Bobby's entire law practice generated in a year. I hired a business manager, expanded the warehouse, and began developing a second product line focused on higher-end pieces using premium materials. The success brought new challenges. I was working 18-hour days, traveling to trade shows and buyer meetings across the Southeast, and managing a team of 12 employees. Savannah, now 10, had become my unofficial assistant, helping with inventory and offering design suggestions with the kind of natural artistic eye that reminded me daily why everything I was building was worth the sacrifice. The irony wasn't lost on me that Bobby, who'd built his career on the Whitfield family name and connections, was watching his ex-wife surpass his achievements through pure entrepreneurial drive. But he remained unaware of the extent of my success, seeing only the surface-level indicators that supported his narrative of my struggle. The spring recital at Apalachicola Elementary was an annual event that brought together the entire social hierarchy of our small town. Parents dressed in their finest, children performed with nervous excitement, and the underlying tensions of small-town politics played out in subtle glances and carefully worded conversations. I had been dreading the event for weeks. Brittany had been particularly vicious lately, using every encounter to remind me of my supposedly diminished circumstances. The previous week, she'd made a point of mentioning their upcoming vacation to the Bahamas while I was picking up Savannah, loudly wondering how some people could afford to give their children proper experiences. That afternoon, as I was getting ready for the recital, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of driving the Honda, I called Premier Luxury Rentals in Tallahassee. The Lamborghini Huracan was available for the evening at a cost that would have seemed impossible 3 years ago, but now represented less than a day's revenue from my business. The car arrived at sunset, delivered by a professional driver who gave me a brief orientation on the vehicle's features before disappearing into an Uber. The Lamborghini was stunning, every curve and line designed to announce success and power. As I drove through the familiar streets of Apalachicola, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about what was to come. I parked the car 3 blocks from the school, not from shame, but from strategy. The reveal needed to be perfect, and I wanted to control every aspect of what was about to unfold. Walking toward the school, I could see the usual cluster of parents gathered near the entrance. Bobby was there in his standard Navy suit, looking every inch the successful small-town attorney. Brittany stood beside him wearing what I recognized as a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, or what she thought was my monthly rent. The moment Brittany spotted me, her face lit up with the kind of predatory glee that had become her trademark. She nudged Bobby, whispered something that made him look uncomfortable, and then launched into her attack. The parking lot fell silent as her voice carried across the evening air. Other parents stopped their conversations, sensing drama. I could see some of them exchanging glances, waiting to see how I would respond to this latest humiliation. But this time, I wasn't the desperate ex-wife scrambling for dignity. This time, I held the keys to a $250,000 car and a business empire that dwarfed anything Bobby had ever achieved. This time, I was ready. I approached the group with measured steps, my expression calm and controlled. Bobby looked embarrassed by his wife's public display, but not enough to intervene. The other parents watched with the kind of morbid fascination that small-town drama always generated. When I reached into my purse and pulled out the Lamborghini's keys, the distinctive logo catching the light from the school's entrance, Brittany's expression began to shift. The keys were unmistakable. No one in Franklin County had ever seen anything like them. The request I made was simple and devastating. Would she mind helping me with a small problem? I was having car trouble and needed someone to move my vehicle. The valet service was running behind, and I didn't want to miss Savannah's performance. Brittany's confident smirk faltered as she processed what I was asking. The other parents leaned in closer, sensing that something significant was happening. Bobby's face had gone pale as he stared at the keys in my hand. The revelation that followed was swift and complete. The car wasn't rented for show. It was a business necessity for client meetings in major cities. The business wasn't a hobby. It was Coastal Treasures Design Studio, a name that several of the other parents recognized from magazine features and social media. The transformation in the group's dynamic was immediate and profound. Parents who had been politely ignoring me for 3 years suddenly wanted to know about my expansion plans, my design process, and my success story. The same people who had whispered about my circumstances were now asking for business advice and congratulating me on my achievements. Bobby pulled me aside during the chaos, his face a mixture of shock and something that might have been respect. His questions came in a rush. When had this happened? Why hadn't I told him during the divorce? How was this possible? The answers were simple but devastating. It had been happening all along. He'd never asked, and I'd built something real while he'd been building something temporary. Brittany's reaction was the most satisfying part of the evening. Her carefully constructed image of superiority crumbled as she realized that the woman she'd been mocking was more successful than her husband had ever been. The designer dress and expensive jewelry suddenly seemed like costume pieces compared to the quiet confidence that came from genuine achievement. But the real victory wasn't in their reactions. It was in Savannah's performance. She played her violin piece with the kind of grace and confidence that made every sacrifice worthwhile. When she finished and looked out at the audience, beaming with pride, I was reminded why I'd built this empire in the first place. After the recital, as parents mingled in the school's common area, the conversation inevitably turned to my success. I found myself surrounded by people who had questions about entrepreneurship, business development, and the challenges of building a company in a small town. The same social circle that had ostracized me after the divorce was now eager to claim connection to my achievements. The drive home in the Lamborghini was surreal. Savannah was full of questions about the car, the business, and what it all meant. I explained that success wasn't about the car or the money. It was about building something meaningful and providing for our family. The Lamborghini was just a tool, like the Honda, designed to get us where we needed to go. Over the following weeks, the story of that evening spread through Apalachicola like wildfire. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, the revelation that quiet Madison Sutton had built a business empire while her ex-husband remained stuck in his family's shadow was irresistible gossip. The impact on Bobby and Brittany's social standing was immediate and lasting. People who had once envied their lifestyle now saw it as small-town pretension compared to genuine success. Brittany's social media posts about their expensive purchases began to seem desperate rather than impressive. Bobby's law practice, while still successful, was overshadowed by his ex-wife's achievements. But I didn't gloat or seek revenge. Instead, I focused on continuing to build something meaningful. 6 months later, Coastal Treasures went public, with an IPO that was oversubscribed by 400%. The success allowed me to establish a scholarship fund for single mothers pursuing entrepreneurship, hire more employees, and expand into new markets. I bought a house on the historic district, not far from Bobby and Brittany's place, but larger and more elegant. The 3-car garage housed the Honda, the Lamborghini, and a Tesla Model S that I used for daily driving. Savannah had her own art studio where she developed her own creative projects, and I had a home office that overlooked the Apalachicola River. The Honda remained my preferred vehicle for most activities. It reminded me of where I'd started and how far I'd traveled. More importantly, it represented the values that had driven my success: practicality, perseverance, and the understanding that true worth came from what you built, not what you owned. Savannah, now 11, had become a budding entrepreneur herself. She'd started a small business selling handmade bookmarks to her classmates, using lessons I'd taught her about customer service, quality control, and fair pricing. Watching her develop the same drive and creativity that had fueled my own success was more rewarding than any financial achievement. The relationship with Bobby evolved into something resembling mutual respect. He'd attempted to reconcile several times, suggesting that we reconsider our arrangement, now that my financial situation had changed. I declined politely but firmly, explaining that I'd built a life without him and wasn't interested in revisiting the past. Brittany's attitude toward me shifted from hostility to something approaching deference. She'd apparently told people for months about Bobby's pathetic ex-wife and her sad little car. The revelation that I was more successful than both of them combined was a bitter pill that she struggled to swallow with grace. But the real transformation was in my own confidence and perspective. The scared, struggling single mother who'd been intimidated by Brittany's designer clothes and expensive car had been replaced by a woman who understood her own worth. The success hadn't changed who I was. It had revealed who I'd been all along. The evening of the recital became a turning point not just for me, but for how success was perceived in our small town. It demonstrated that true achievement came from building something meaningful rather than simply inheriting family connections or marrying into established wealth. As I tucked Savannah into bed one night, she asked me about the differences between our old life and our new one. I explained that the external changes, the house, the cars, the financial security, were less important than the internal transformation. We'd learned that we were capable of more than we'd ever imagined, and that knowledge was worth more than any material possession. The Lamborghini still sat in the garage, a reminder of that pivotal evening when everything changed. But it was the Honda, with its reliable engine and practical design, that represented the true victory. It had carried us through the darkest period of our lives and witnessed our rise to success. It was a symbol of perseverance, determination, and the understanding that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply refusing to give up. Today, Coastal Treasures employs 47 people across 3 states. The business has expanded beyond jewelry to include home accessories, art pieces, and a new line of children's products that Savannah helps design. I've been featured in magazines, invited to speak at conferences, and recognized as one of the Southeast's most successful female entrepreneurs. But the moments I treasure most are the quiet ones. Working alongside Savannah in her art studio, driving the Honda to pick up groceries, or sitting on our porch overlooking the river. These simple pleasures remind me that success isn't about impressing others or proving them wrong. It's about building a life that reflects your values and provides for the people you love. The story of that spring evening has become part of local legend. The night Madison Sutton revealed her true success to the people who had underestimated her. But for me, it was simply another step in a journey that began with a single $20 sale and continues with each new challenge and opportunity. The weeks following the recital brought unexpected developments. 3 major retailers reached out after hearing about Coastal Treasures through the social media buzz generated by that evening. The ripple effects of one moment of vindication were transforming into genuine business opportunities that would reshape not just my company, but the entire economic landscape of our small coastal town. Margaret Fitzgerald, the superintendent of Franklin County Schools, called to discuss establishing a mentorship program for students interested in entrepreneurship. She'd been at the recital, witnessed the entire exchange, and was impressed by both my success and my gracious handling of Brittany's public humiliation. The program would allow me to work with high school students, sharing lessons about business development, financial planning, and the realities of building a company from scratch. The first meeting was held in the same elementary school where everything had changed. 15 students from Apalachicola High School gathered in the music room, their faces a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Many of them had heard their parents discussing my success, but seeing me in person, still driving the Honda, still wearing modest clothing, still speaking with the same quiet confidence I'd always had, seemed to surprise them. Isabella Chun, a junior whose family had moved to Apalachicola from Tampa, raised her hand during my presentation. Her question was direct and challenging. How did I know when to take risks, and how did I handle the fear of failure? The answer required me to share details about those early days that I'd never discussed publicly. The first year after the divorce had been terrifying. Some nights, after Savannah was asleep, I'd sit at my kitchen table with spreadsheets and calculator, trying to figure out how to make the numbers work. The apartment on Avenue E was affordable, but barely. The Honda was reliable, but the repair bills were starting to mount. My jewelry business was growing, but slowly, and there were weeks when I wondered if I was deluding myself about its potential. The turning point came during a particularly difficult period in the winter of 2022. Savannah had been invited to a classmate's birthday party at the country club, and I'd spent days agonizing over whether I could afford the gift and the party outfit. When I finally decided we could manage both, Savannah's excitement made every sacrifice worthwhile. But it was at that party, watching other parents effortlessly discuss their vacation plans and private school choices, that I realized I needed to think bigger. That night, I made a decision that changed everything. Instead of treating Coastal Treasures as a side business that helped pay the bills, I would commit to making it my primary focus. I withdrew the last of my savings, bought better equipment, and began working 16-hour days to build something that could compete on a national level. The students listened intently as I described the challenges of those early days. The rejected applications for business loans, the trade show booth that cost more than I made in a month, the inventory that sat unsold for weeks while I learned about marketing and customer acquisition. But I also shared the small victories that kept me going. The first wholesale order that allowed me to hire help, the magazine feature that brought national attention, the moment when I realized I was no longer struggling to survive, but building something that could thrive. Marcus Williams, a senior who'd been working part-time at his family's bait shop, asked about scaling a business in a small town. His question led to a discussion about the advantages and challenges of rural entrepreneurship. Apalachicola's small size meant limited local markets, but it also meant lower overhead costs and a tight-knit community that could provide support and word-of-mouth marketing. The mentorship program expanded beyond my initial expectations. Within 3 months, 5 students had launched their own small businesses, everything from a lawn care service to a social media consulting company for local restaurants. Savannah, now in 6th grade, became an unofficial assistant instructor, sharing her own experiences with her mother's business and demonstrating that entrepreneurship could be a family affair. The success of the mentorship program attracted attention from the Florida Department of Economic Development. They invited me to speak at a conference in Orlando about rural business development, my first major public speaking engagement. The audience of 200 business leaders and government officials was intimidating, but the message was one I'd been living for years. Success wasn't about location or connections, but about persistence, creativity, and the willingness to work harder than anyone expected. The speech was well received, leading to invitations to speak at other conferences and serve on advisory boards for small business development programs. My calendar filled with opportunities that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. But the foundation of everything remained the same. The business I'd built one sale at a time, the daughter I was raising one conversation at a time, and the life I was creating one decision at a time. Bobby's reaction to my rising profile was complex and revealing. During one of our custody exchanges, he mentioned that he'd heard about my speech in Orlando. His tone was carefully neutral, but I could detect a mixture of pride and regret. He'd once dismissed my craft project as a waste of time, but now he was watching his ex-wife become a recognized business leader while his own career remained limited to Franklin County legal matters. The conversation that followed was one of the most honest we'd had since the divorce. Bobby admitted that he'd underestimated me, both during our marriage and after. He'd assumed that my quiet nature meant I lacked ambition, when in reality I'd been channeling that ambition into building something meaningful. He also acknowledged that his treatment of me during the divorce had been unfair and short-sighted. But the most significant revelation came when he asked if I thought we could have worked things out if he'd been more supportive of my business aspirations. The question required careful consideration. The affair with Brittany had been a betrayal that went beyond professional disagreements, but his dismissive attitude toward my entrepreneurial efforts had been a deeper wound. I told him that I believed we'd both become the people we were meant to be, even if the path had been painful. Brittany's adjustment to the new reality was more difficult to watch. She'd built her identity around being the successful lawyer's wife, the woman who'd won the prize that I'd supposedly lost. The revelation that I'd never been competing for that prize, that I'd been building something far more valuable while she was focused on status symbols, had shaken her foundation. Her response was to double down on the luxury lifestyle, posting increasingly elaborate social media content about their purchases and experiences. But the comments section told a different story. Instead of the envy and admiration she'd once received, people were now making comparisons to my success and questioning the substance behind the surface. The situation came to a head during the annual Seafood Festival, Apalachicola's biggest social event. Brittany had apparently spent weeks planning her outfit and coordinating their attendance at the VIP reception. But when I arrived, wearing a simple dress and the Honda keys in my hand, the attention shifted immediately to my presence and the business updates I shared with other attendees. Later that evening, I found Brittany alone on the pier, staring out at the water. She looked younger and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her, and for the first time, I felt genuine sympathy for her situation. She'd defined herself in opposition to me, and now that I'd succeeded beyond her worst fears, she was struggling to find her own identity. Our conversation was brief but significant. She apologized for her behavior at the recital and acknowledged that she'd been wrong about my circumstances. But more importantly, she expressed uncertainty about her own future. She'd given up her career to support Bobby's ambitions, but now she was questioning whether that sacrifice had been worth it. I suggested that it wasn't too late to pursue her own interests, whether that meant returning to law or exploring other opportunities. The paralegal skills that had helped her advance at Bobby's firm could be valuable in other contexts. She seemed surprised by my encouragement, but I learned that success was more satisfying when it didn't require diminishing others. The business continued to grow at an almost overwhelming pace. By the end of the year, Coastal Treasures had opened a second location in Tallahassee and was planning expansion into Georgia and Alabama. The employee count had reached 67, making it one of the largest private employers in Franklin County. The economic impact on Apalachicola was significant, with suppliers, contractors, and service providers all benefiting from the company's growth. But the most meaningful development was personal. During one of our regular Saturday morning breakfast conversations, Savannah told me that she'd been thinking about her own future career plans. She was interested in business, but also in environmental science and marine biology. The combination seemed natural for someone who'd grown up in a coastal community with an entrepreneurial mother. Her idea was to develop a line of eco-friendly jewelry using sustainable materials and processes that would appeal to environmentally conscious consumers. The concept was sophisticated for an 11-year-old, but her understanding of both business principles and environmental concerns was impressive. We began working together on a prototype collection, with Savannah handling the design concepts while I managed the technical and business aspects. The project became a bonding experience that exceeded my expectations. Savannah's creativity and fresh perspective pushed me to think about sustainability in ways I hadn't considered. Her generation's environmental consciousness was inspiring, and incorporating those values into Coastal Treasures felt like a natural evolution of the company's mission. The prototype collection, tentatively called Gulf Coast Green, featured pieces made from recycled metals, ethically sourced stones, and innovative materials like reclaimed shell and sea glass. Each piece would come with information about its environmental impact and suggestions for sustainable living. The concept was ambitious, but Savannah's enthusiasm and the growing market for eco-friendly products made it feel achievable. The development process required research trips to sustainable material suppliers, consultations with environmental scientists, and meetings with potential retail partners who shared our values. Savannah accompanied me to many of these meetings, observing the negotiation process and contributing her own insights about design and marketing. Her presence at business meetings was initially met with surprise, but her articulate questions and genuine passion for the project won over even the most skeptical participants. Watching her confidence grow in professional settings reminded me of my own journey from hesitant entrepreneur to recognized business leader. The Gulf Coast Green Collection launched 6 months later with a reception at the new Tallahassee location. The event attracted environmental advocates, business leaders, and media representatives from across the Southeast. Savannah gave a presentation about the collection's environmental impact and her vision for sustainable business practices that received a standing ovation. The success of the launch exceeded our projections, with initial orders selling out within weeks. But more importantly, the collection established Coastal Treasures as an innovator in sustainable luxury goods, opening doors to new markets and partnership opportunities that aligned with our values. The recognition that followed was gratifying but not unexpected. The company received awards for environmental innovation and social responsibility. I was invited to speak at conferences about sustainable business practices and intergenerational entrepreneurship. The media attention was positive but carefully managed to protect Savannah's privacy while allowing her to share her passion for environmental conservation. But the most significant recognition came from an unexpected source. The Whitfield family, Bobby's parents, who had once dismissed me as a gold-digging housewife, requested a meeting to discuss potential collaboration between their law firm and Coastal Treasures. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that had once considered me beneath their notice was now seeking to benefit from my success. The meeting was professionally cordial but emotionally complex. Robert Whitfield Jr. acknowledged that they'd misjudged me during the divorce proceedings and expressed admiration for what I'd accomplished. His wife, Patricia, who had once made cutting remarks about my circumstances, now spoke respectfully about my business acumen and community impact. Their proposal was straightforward. They wanted to provide legal services for Coastal Treasure's continued expansion, leveraging their local connections and legal expertise to support the company's growth. The offer was professionally attractive, but I needed time to consider the personal implications of working with the family that had once tried to minimize my contributions and worth. After a week of consideration, I agreed to a limited partnership focused on specific legal matters. The decision was based on business logic rather than personal vindication, but it represented a completion of the circle that had begun with their dismissive treatment years earlier. The partnership proved mutually beneficial. The Whitfield firm gained prestige from association with a successful, nationally recognized company, while Coastal Treasures benefited from their local expertise and connections. More importantly, the relationship demonstrated that success had transformed me from someone seeking approval to someone offering opportunities. Sometimes I drive past Bobby and Brittany's house, noting the BMW and Mercedes in the driveway, and feel nothing but gratitude for the path that led me here. The divorce that I thought would destroy me actually freed me to become who I was meant to be. The humiliation that was supposed to break me instead forged me into someone stronger. Savannah and I are building something that will last generations. Not just a business, but a legacy of determination, creativity, and the understanding that true worth comes from what you contribute to the world, not what you own. Whether we're driving the Honda or the Lamborghini, we're driving toward a future that we've created together, one decision at a time. The Valet incident became a small legend in Apalachicola, but it was never about the car or the money. It was about the quiet satisfaction of building something meaningful, providing for my daughter, and proving to myself that I was capable of more than anyone else's opinion of me. In the end, that's the only validation that truly matters. 3 years later, as I prepare for Coastal Treasure's initial public offering and plan our expansion into international markets, I sometimes reflect on that evening in the school parking lot. The woman who stood frozen by her Honda Civic, absorbing Brittany's cruel words, feels like a different person now. But in reality, she was the same person who exists today, someone with untapped potential, unlimited determination, and the courage to build something meaningful from nothing. The Honda still sits in the garage, a reminder of where we started and how far we've traveled. Savannah, now 14 and already developing her own business plans, sometimes asks if we should sell it. But I explain that some things are too valuable to measure in dollars. They represent the journey, the struggle, and the triumph that followed. The Lamborghini remains a symbol of that pivotal evening, but it's the Honda that represents the real victory. It carried us through the darkest period of our lives and witnessed our rise to success. It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply refusing to give up, regardless of what anyone else believes about your worth or potential. The best revenge, I've learned, isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Sometimes that requires a Lamborghini, but most of the time, a Honda Civic and unwavering determination are more than enough. Thanks for listening to this powerful story. Subscribe for more stories about the surprising ways people change our lives for the better. See you in the next story.